INISEG, the International Institute for Global Security Studies, has created the INISEG CAST section with the purpose of informing, analyzing, conversing, and discussing in a natural and uncensored way each and every one of the political and social events that happen in society. We are not journalists, but we still believe that we have the power to speak up and educate our audience. Why not deliver a different point of view? No violence, no bad words, no bad intentions. Just be us. We are INISEG CAST, connecting thoughts.
Good morning and good afternoon to all our audience. One more time here in our channel, INISEG CAST. Today we have a special guest. Our guest today is a recognized leader in the field of politics, investigation, and security. A writer and former national security official in the Trump administration. This is a very interesting topic that we will hang in few minutes. Also, he in these days, he's a lecturer in politics and research fellow at Hildale College Kirby Center in Washington. So for me, it's an honor to present in INISEG CAST, Michael Anton. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
I don't know if before you talk a lot about how is the current situation in United States, but the country is a very divided country. Yes. With many different point of view. In your experience inside the White House, or for example, now in your job, what do you think of this monolithic force that took over of the country now?
Well, it's been a long time brewing, developing, I think. I mean, if you think back, it seems sudden because within my lifetime, two presidents won the presidency. Well, they were reelected, they didn't win initially, but winning 49 of 50 states, which is completely inconceivable now. That happened in 1972 and in 1984. And the 1988 election was still fairly lopsided. From that point on, the closest thing you get to a unifying landslide is probably Obama in 2008. Even that was a lot closer than the big landslides that we saw in the 20th century, like Nixon's and Reagan's and LBJ's, FDR's, and so on, where the country really did kind of come together, not always behind a Republican or a Democrat, but from both. And even that one was fairly close compared to those, and Obama was reelected with a tighter margin than he was elected, which usually doesn't happen. Usually you get elected and you do better the second time, unless you lose. But if you are reelected, you do better the second time. So there's an extent to which it looks sudden, but if you think back far enough, these divisions have been growing. I point to a book, that a lot of people on the conservative side of the aisle in America still read, but it's not, I don't think it's necessarily world famous, called The Managerial Revolution by James Burnham, which I want to say came out around 1940. I'm not quite certain, but anyway, around there. And he said the economy and society is diverging in two different directions, sort of based on what type of job you have and what your education is. And that prediction has turned out to be true. But what we've also seen is, in addition to it being education and job-based, it's geographic, because the two things go together. So, the managerial class, as Burnham described it, would have been highly educated and working in a kind of knowledge or managerial economy, as opposed to, manufacturing, farming, the old traditional make things kind of economy. You could say, well, okay, but in principle, those people could be anywhere. But as a matter of fact, they tend to concentrate on the coast and in the big cities. And so the societal division has accelerated the geographic division, and they both accelerated one another. So when you look at it now, the two Americas are essentially rural versus urban, coastal versus interior, old economy versus new economy, educated versus, I was gonna say uneducated. That's not fair. Less educated. President Trump famously, I found this amusing in 2016 when he was running. Somebody told him, you know, well, you're doing great with the people with only a high school diploma. You know, that's your strongest demographic. And Trump said something like, "I love the poorly educated," and everyone laughed and said, you know, he's insulting these people, but he didn't mean it as an insult. As an educator myself, I happen to think that a lot of what passes for education is not much. So it's better to call it credentialed versus the uncredentialed, or the more credentialed versus the less credentialed. But that's essentially where the divide is, right? It's urban, credentialed, managerial knowledge economy versus rural or interior and old economy. And those are the kind of the two Americas, I would say.
Yeah. For example, you mentioned the managerial class, and it's interesting that, for example, if you see, you know, Silicon Valley, maybe California, the more you say that educated,
Yeah.
or more big tech, you know, the big tech cities have more in common with Berlin or Paris than with Idaho, New Mexico,
Yeah.
Arizona. Arizona is changing, right? But you know, the so-called red states. And how can you fix this? How can you make this alignment, and so that Los Angeles resonates more with you know, Boulder, Colorado, and they can work together. You know,
well, Los Angeles and Boulder do work together because there are red states, but there are really no red cities in America. The last sort of holdouts, maybe, you know, might have been Dallas, San Diego, Indianapolis, but even the cities that had an old conservative tint to them that could elect a Republican mayor, they've all gone Democratic now. So,
and why is that?
Well, precisely because of the concentration of credentialed knowledge workers in industries in these places are you know, most of the big cities used to be Democratic, but for different reasons. They were Democratic because they were manufacturing kind of union towns controlled by
convenient
machine bosses. But that was a long time. You watch an old movie like The Last Hurrah, where Spencer Tracy plays the mayor of an unnamed city, but it's supposed to be Boston, as an old school machine boss. And that kind of politics hasn't been current in American cities in 50 years. The cities have been transformed as the old middle class has moved out, you know, and they moved out for a lot of reasons. Some they moved out because they could just get more living space in a suburb. Some they moved out because of the crime wave that really started in America in the 60s, and they got tired of it. Some moved out because they feel like they just didn't belong there anymore. And some got priced out, where it became impossible to raise a family in the city. And so when the families flow out, the singles come in, or, you know, well, there used to be a phrase in America, DINK, double income, no kids. One doesn't hear that much anymore. But you use those sort of, or just, you know, you see this too in a lot of big cities where people get married late. Maybe they have one kid. But, you know, the big city is not a place to raise a lot of children unless you have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And so the demographic transformation in the cities is more than anything driven it. And also, to a big extent, I think mayors, starting in the 90s, maybe before that, prioritize these types of industries by saying, well, they try to attract managerial and knowledge class industries, and because they think, well, this is going to improve the tax base, they'll gentrify neighborhoods, and, you know, it'll have all these benefits to the city. Maybe many of those benefits were real, and they accrued to these cities. But the one consequence was they made, you know, the cities less hospitable to families, and it just changed the demographic. They just accelerated that demographic outflow of the old sort of middle class who might have voted Republican or been more conservative, and the inflow of people who are much more democratic and more liberal in their outlook. And
your expectation for the future now is Biden? I don't know, the future will be maybe Trump again. How is your expectation in this topic?
Well, look, I would do the self-serving thing and point to a book that I published last year in September of 2020 called The Stakes, America at the Point of No Return. And chapters 6 and 7 give a fairly extensive speculative account of the future without making predictions. I don't know what's going to happen. I just say these are the possible scenarios. And so what seems to be going on in America right now is that the blue managerial class is firmly in control of all the institutions. Now, someone could critique me and say, well, what do you mean firmly when the Senate is 50-50, the House majority went down? So, okay, fair enough. The margins are small. But as we saw in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, even when the Republicans have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, they can't get much done. They weren't able to enact a lot of Trump's agenda. In fact, instead, Trump didn't campaign on a big tax cut, but it's the signature piece of legislation that he got in his administration, certainly in the first year, because it was the only thing unifying the Republican caucus. So Republicans can't get much done. So I think they're in pretty firm control. The demography is on their side. I expect that they will win the 2024 election. I mean, you never know. 2016 happened. I didn't expect it to happen. And so that maybe illustrates the point that anything can happen. I just, would assume that one possibility, maybe the most likely possibility, is that things just keep on going on the way that they're going on. And then that will be a test of how well the current ruling class or ruling organs of the US government, how competent it is at administering this thing. And there are reasons to doubt that they're very competent at it, and that they can keep this going for a long time.
But they don't have to do a lot, right? Because as you say, the demographics are with them. There's a lot of external factors. Well, external that are very internal to the political process right now, as the academia, the media.
I mean, I think you're probably right. My sense is that the demographics are with it. On the other hand, a lot of people pointed with, some with hope and others with alarm, depending on how you look at it, to, counties, for instance, in Texas that have been heavily Latino since Texas was a state in the Rio Grande Valley, right on the Mexican border, they shifted greatly toward the Republican side in a way that no one's ever seen before. Now, that could either be a blip, or it could be a real movement that doesn't have the sufficient numbers behind it to really make a difference, or it could be the beginning of a serious realignment. And it's just too soon to say. The assumption for the last 20 years among Democrats has been, don't worry, we got this, demography is on our side. I still think that's the way to bet, but it's less certain. It feels and looks less certain in 2021 than it did, say, in 2002, when two Democratic political consultant, analyst, and demographer types published a book called The Emerging Democratic Majority. They were confident 19 years ago that this was the future and it was going to happen. And I think it should be slightly less confident today, even though as I said, that's still the way to bet.
Okay, but even with the demographics on their side, the truth is that Trump won in 2016, right?
Right.
So it's about how you can get people to vote more. And if you look carefully, Trump got more votes in 2020 than in 2016.
Yeah.
So there's you can cross the party line and actually try to get to some theoretically people
say that it's unknown at this point whether the Republican Party can pull that off. Much more known, I mean, it's just a fact, an obvious fact, is if the Republican Party can't pull it off, then it goes away. It becomes irrelevant. The way that the only reason that there's a California or a New York Republican Party, for instance, is because the Republican Party is still relevant nationally, but they have no power at the state level. If we got to a point where the Republicans had no national power, it would disappear. And then the question is, does another party emerge? This has happened. It's been a long time in the United States since a fundamental realignment happened where a party died and a new one was born. But if democratic politics are to continue, then a new party would have to emerge that represents some kind of coalition that opposes the ruling coalition. That could happen. Or it's not out of the realm of possibility that Americans, the part of the Americans that feel a bit disaffected from the blue ruling class, just kind of sink into apathy and don't reorganize themselves or don't have sufficient numbers, and America just turns into a blue state on a national level. That could also happen. I don't rule that out. I don't predict either one necessarily, but those who say, well, in a democracy there will always be two-party competition, that's true, but that doesn't mean that the country has to be a democracy the way it was forever. And in fact, some countries that you could say are democracies, Japan, there's not real two-party competition. It's been ruled essentially by one party, as has Mexico for years, right? And you wouldn't call these countries non-democracies because people vote in politics and jockeying takes place, but there are huge, they're dominated by a consensus. I think that's what America may head to. That is a consensus at the top, or among half or 60%, where 40% don't share the consensus, but they have no real way to let their voice be heard and no real way to affect anything. That's certainly true in a state like California or New York or Massachusetts. It just doesn't matter if you're a Republican there. You can live there. Why would you want to, I guess? But you can live there, but you can't affect anything.
And about, for example, the way that Trump lead all the country, you would change something how he approached his work when he was president. You would change something, like you say, if he worked a little bit different, maybe he would gain more votes, or he would, I don't know, get another result in the.
Oh, sure. I mean, I have been careful about criticizing him because I just, I owe him a lot. I feel like I owe him my loyalty, among other things. And I also don't want to give his enemies, ammo to say, oh, former Trump aide criticizes the president. I do think, though, that, my side of this, my political side of the argument, does need to get together and have honest conversations with ourselves about what went wrong. I mean, there's a few things I could say. The personnel operation, in other words, who Trump hired, was very spotty. He made some great hires. He made some very bad hires. And if the Republicans are ever going to win the White House again, they're going to have to do a lot better job. I mean, the personnel operation got itself together toward the end and was starting to really get it right, but it wasn't getting it right from the beginning. And that would be a problem. And just the priorities, like I said, I think, why is the first year, usually a president gets his signature major legislation passed in his first year, first 6 months even. Reagan said, I need a huge tax cut and a military buildup. And he got those things out of the Congress in 1981. Well, Trump wanted to, a border wall and infrastructure and things. And instead, he didn't start with those. He started with something he didn't really actively campaign on, meaning the repeal of so-called Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act. And he lost because one senator voted against him. I make no claim that if only he had done this, it all would have worked out. But in hindsight, why not start with a huge infrastructure bill, right? Which is something that your blue collar base would love, and something that the Democrats would find difficult to oppose. I mean, they want to oppose it just because they want to oppose Trump, but there are a lot of Democratic constituencies would benefit from it. He didn't start with that. So I think just more generally, once he won, he thought that he would try to let bygones be bygones in this sense. He won the nomination by running against the Republican establishment, by saying, you guys have been doing things wrong for a long time. You're out of touch with the voters. And he didn't, usually if you want to win the Republican primary for president, you wait your turn until it's, you're eminent enough. And then you treat everybody very respectfully, and you pretend, you say that you worship Ronald Reagan and other Republican heroes and so on. And he just went in there and said, you guys have been screwing up for a long time. And he was out of turn. And he beat them all. And when he got in there, I think in hindsight, maybe he should have continued running against the Republican establishment. And instead of trying to make deals with Paul Ryan and McConnell, he should have kept after them and forced them to make deals with him. Says, no, I'm going to keep the pressure on you guys. This is not, this is not the party of the Chamber of Commerce and lobbyists anymore. It's the populist party. And so I'm happy to make a deal, but we're going to make it on my terms, and you're going to come to me. And I think he was a little too cooperative with those guys.
That was maybe that was because Trump was the first victim of the what I call the media trap, because when Trump got elected in November 2020, 16, the media, oh, now is coming. The Adolf, the American Hitler, is coming to the White House. So Trump, reaching out to the Republican establishment, wanted to give a sign of, no, this is a political alternative. I reach out to this guy, so everything is okay. But you know, the power of media determines the agenda, the political agenda.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to that, but but also, you know, one of the criticisms of Trump in 2015 and 16 was the guy's never held elective office before, and presidency is not an entry-level job. That sounds like a pretty obvious point to make, and it is. But it's also, there's a lot of truth in it. You know, the previous presidents who have come to the presidency without ever having been elected to something before were generals, which means they had to run large political operations, because running a big army, especially in a war, when you have coalitions to manage. You think about somebody like Eisenhower, never been a governor, never been a senator, but, you know, being the supreme commander in World War II and having to deal with, you know, balance the interests of a number of different allies, because you remember how many. This was not just the American army, not even the American and the British army. There's Americans, there's British, there's Canadians, there's Free French, there's Free Poles, there's just lots of moving parts that you're thinking about all the time. And you could manage all of that. And Trump, I think, did tend to see things through the perspective of a businessman who could make deals and maybe insufficiently recognize the extent to which, you know, if you're in business, you're making a deal with somebody. The idea is, I'm not going to get all I want and you're not going to get all you want, but we're both going to end up making money out of this. So we have some common shared interest. It's harder to make deals in politics when there aren't common shared interests, when any extent to which I'm winning means you're losing. So the basis of the deal is much more difficult. And I think that's one of the ways that maybe handicapped him, is that having spent a life in business and really no time in politics, he had to learn on the job the differences between the two. And I think he was learning, and I think he was doing, you know, the Trump administration consistently got better at a lot of these things as it went on. The problem with the American system is your window to get things done as a president is narrow. It's when you're newly elected. It's certainly legislatively, it's narrow. I mean, you always have control over foreign affairs and that kind of thing, but you know, that's where you kind of need to come in knowing exactly. So when Ronald Reagan comes in, he's been a 2-term governor, and he's run for president 3 times, right? And he knows the system well. He knows the players. He knows the people. It was, in a sense, he was, you know, more primed for the role than President Trump was. Now, President Trump had, the right program, and it was not a Reagan-esque program, saying that he was going to renegotiate trade deals. He was going to back out of bad deals. He was going to retrench our foreign military presence overseas. He was going to look at alliances. He wasn't going to prioritize tax cuts and regulation. All of these things were not Reagan-esque policies. I mean, it's more that his less from a policy perspective, which Trump got right. That is to say, what was needed in 2016 is what he was talking about. It was not what Reagan was talking about in 1980. Reagan's program was needed in 1980, but not in 2016, and vice versa. It's just more the preparation for learning how to do the job.
And your experience working with him, because he has, of course, this image like a general manager, a very disciplined guy that he worked very strict with the people around him. How was your experience as a national security area?
You know, there's no real difference between the public and the private Trump. So what you all saw is what I saw. So if I could, you know, if I was in a room somewhere with a handful of people with him, he doesn't behave or act any differently. It reminds me of there's a comedy sketch show in the United States called Saturday Night Live. It's been on for, I don't know, almost my whole life. And the public impression of Reagan was that he was this nice, genial, semi-slow old man. Not super dumb, but not that bright either. And kind of got up late and went home early and, you know, said, "Aw, shucks," and stuff. And there's a Saturday Night Live sketch that you may be able to find on YouTube, which was hilarious. It was this person playing the public Reagan exactly the way he appeared on TV. And as soon as he got behind closed doors, he was a dynamo. He would be giving orders. He was yelling. He was super energetic. People would be like getting tired. And he was like, wake up, we gotta, this is urgent. The contrast was just unbelievable between the public and the private Reagan. Yeah, that's not Trump. The public Trump is the private Trump, at least what I saw.
Good to know that, because not all people talk about this human side of Trump.
Yeah.
It's good to say, especially to our audience, because we expect that he comes back very soon.
Well, I mean, he not clear. I mean, he is obviously thinking about running. He may not do it in the end. He's going to start giving rallies again. So I don't know. That could go either way. Whether he'll run again and whether he can win again. It's only happened once in American history that a president has lost and then come back and won a second non-consecutive term. That was Grover Cleveland, and it was in the 19th century. So never say never. Anything can happen.
Everything is possible. Everything is possible. Yeah.
Keep in mind, though, a Trump in 2024 will be, I think he'll be about as old as Biden was when Biden first ran. And now Trump, seems a lot more energetic than Joe Biden. But it's hard. I mean, it's grueling, not just to be president, but especially to run for president is a very, very grueling thing. It's hard even to do when you're, 69, which is what I think that's how old Trump was when he first did it. And that's how old Reagan was when he was first elected, right? It's, so if it's hard when you're 69, imagine how hard it is when you're 78.
Do you think President Trump can be the Andrew Jackson, like we talk about the Jacksonian Republic? Do you think President Trump can inaugurate a Trumpian Republic?
Well, a whole republic, no, because I mean, you could say even Jackson didn't do that. What he did is he represented the interests of a sector of the republic, that whole western, the backwoods part, that felt neglected. So that doesn't mean that you can change or you can alter the direction of the republic, but Jackson didn't take over, and he didn't Jacksonianize the entire country. The big Eastern interests remained. The remnant of the Federalists became the Whigs. Everything moves around and changes. So Trump could certainly do that, or he could decide at the end of the day that he's not going to run and get behind some Trump-like successor.
Obama kind of, the Democrats with Obama kind of wanted to be a transformative president, so that the whole discourse in the future will be whether you are pro-Obama or you are anti-Obama. I think Obama wanted to begin a cycle that could go far beyond his tenure as a president, and set up a new cycle of American democracy. I think Obama, the Democrats saw Obama like a new Reagan, like their Reagan that can change the world.
Formative president, and just not to the extent that he wanted. I mean, Obama wanted to really take the country sharply to the left, which he did. He wanted to get some big programs passed, which he did. But his ambitions were much greater than what he was able to accomplish, just given the difficulties inherent in the U.S. system. But there's no question that the country is the center of political gravity has moved much to the left in Obama's time, especially in his second term. And Trump is, in a sense, a reaction. Trump's victory was, in a sense, a reaction to that. Now, the people and the interests and ideas and stuff that Trump woke up, I don't think are going away. The question is whether they have sufficient numbers and sufficient influence to really make an impact on the political system. And that's not clear, because they are totally locked out of the media and the culture and the universities and sort of everything that, and social media and tech and all of that. That is utterly 100% dominated by Blue America. And Blue America really lets it be known that it is hostile to Red America on these issues and just won't let them talk. I mean, Twitter and Facebook and Google and other things, they're openly suppressive and censorial to these kinds of ideas. And it's hard to win politically in a nominal democracy if you can't promote your message. So it may be that they are able to win simply through the control of the information media, that doesn't mean that those people and those sentiments go away. It means that they just get sidelined. And then two things, it seems to me one of two things happen. One is that they get angry that they've been locked out of the system, and there's a real backlash and reaction. Or the second is they just drift into kind of apathy, accept it, and kind of stop participating. I think either one of those outcomes is bad, which is why I'm sort of hoping, I don't expect the ruling elite here to moderate, but I'm hoping that they will.
Michael, let's talk about national security. Do you think America is a secure country now?
Well, I mean, secure from what? Is it secure from invasion? Sure, absolutely.
Terrorism?
No, I don't know that any country can be fully secure from terrorism. Terrorism is one of those things. If you're determined to do it, it's too hard to stop everyone. But look, after 9/11, there was a pretty big expectation that the United States was going to be dealing with severe terrorism for years to come, and that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Now, to what extent did that not happen because of the security apparatus, the new powers given to the security state? It's not zero. I don't know what, but the security state would say, well, it's because we have all these powers and we're so good we stop everything, right? And to what extent did some of this result from a deterrent effect, that strong action after 9/11 kind of let everybody go, okay, let's not focus our energies there? And to what extent was the initial assessment simply wrong? That is to say, 9/11 was more of an outlier than the foreshadowing of the future. Somehow it seems to me, all three of those arguments could be true to an extent that we don't know. But I can tell you this, like nobody, terrorism was the defining issue of the 2004 election, which Bush was reelected. It barely looms anymore. And it loomed bigger actually in 2016 because of certain things that happened. I mean, there was a mass shooting in Florida. There was a mass shooting in I think San Bernardino County, California. All of this is domestic, though. These weren't, foreign acts like 9/11, things like that. Mm. And there were several horrific things that happened in France. I remember the truck on the promenade in Nice. But all of those point to uncomfortable questions that Americans have a hard time dealing with, which is like, if somebody from another country flies an airplane into a building, like, we know what to do. If somebody who's an immigrant here or the children of immigrants here does something, like, we don't know what to do. How do we deal with it? And France, I mean, more than any country in Europe, it seems to me, France has this problem of domestic radicalization, and they're struggling with it. But right now, I think Americans feel much more economically insecure than they do physically insecure.
And what's your? I don't know if you can share with us, but what is your view, your insight about CIA, how the CIA is operating right now?
I mean, I think it has too much unaccountable power, and I also think that and I would say this broadly about the intelligence community overall, not just the CIA. They have adopted for themselves, and policymakers and others have been too eager to go along with this notion that they get to be the arbiter of truth. So a thing is only true if there's an intelligent assessment saying it's true, and you don't get to question the basis of the intelligence. So to me, a great example, it's old, but it'll kind of never go away, is the assessment that Russia interfered in the US election and elected Donald Trump. So this was first made public, I want to say January of 2017. So, but definitely in the transition before Trump took office, and they made public the assessment. And I remember reading it the day it came out. And the assessment was just a bunch of conclusions and assertions. It gave you no insight into why the intelligence community believed these things happened. And that's too often what they do, is they just say, we have judged. And then if you say, I don't know that I necessarily agree with this, then you're accused of politicizing the intelligence. And I do think they have too much power to set narratives and to decide what is true and what is not true. And that more people at every level, both in politics and outside politics, should push back and say, you know what, you don't get to be the decider on these kinds of things. Show me your information and I will process it, and I will decide for myself what I want to do with it.
Do you think that the main problem with Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, all these countries from South America, this social breakdown or social stroke that is really a current problem. Do you think the main problem is the intelligence force because it's failing maybe in some point?
States intelligence agencies definitely have a history of messing around in these places, but they're supposed to have stopped doing that, and I hope that they have. I'm not far from any kind of expert on South America. But from afar, it looks like these are essentially economic problems that are causing a similar divide that you get here in America, where a lot of people just feel totally left out, and that a ruling class is accruing all the benefits and so on. I don't know. Like I said, I just don't. The last thing I'm aware of where the United States was really cooperative, but with the full participation of the government in South America, was the war against the FARC in Colombia, which was, these narco terrorists that controlled this huge swath of territory in the middle of the country, large swath of territory outside all the major cities. It was essentially not uninhabited, but much more sparsely inhabited, difficult to inhabit jungle, and they financed their war with selling drugs. And the Colombian government hated them, and the United States government hated them, so they had a clear common interest in working together. And they basically, over 10 years, won a war against this group. But that's the last thing that I really know about where the U.S. is involved in South America. I don't know much about. I honestly, I haven't followed what's going on in Chile carefully, except to say that I know more about Venezuela just because it's been going on longer and it's been covered more. It's been covered more. But it's sad to me because I've been to Chile, and that was a really successful country. Mm-hmm. And I would hate to see it, come apart or even be set back over something like this. First, it was just a pleasant place to visit, and second of all, it was in a region where one hears lots of bad news. Like, that was a country that was working, and I'd hate to see it slip backward.
What do you think is the best strategy to beat China Communist Party?
I mean, I don't know that I necessarily want to beat China. That is to say, I just want to protect America's interests against China. So, and to me, that's mostly domestic. It has mostly a matter of domestic industry. I don't know that we need to be or want to be in a Cold War with China. That is to say, the reason the United States had to be in a Cold War with the USSR, so the USSR was pretty open about the fact that it wanted to conquer Western Europe, and after that, it wanted to conquer the world, right? The Chinese don't say that, and I know people who say, yeah, well, that's what they want to do. But then I know a lot of other China experts who say they don't really. They want to be number one in their sphere, but the idea of world domination does not interest them. So now, that said, they act in very predatory ways against the U.S. economy. But I was in the room in Beijing when Trump said, in front of Xi Jinping, he said, "I don't blame them. I blame us. We let them get away with the stuff that they're doing to us." That's completely true. A great deal, the vast majority of the harm that China has inflicted on the U.S. economy has been done completely in cahoots with the American ruling class and business class, because it's in their short-term interest and in their company's interest, and they don't think about what it does to the country as a whole. So, it's hard to blame China for that when, if we were doing a better job of protecting our own interests, we should be trying to make it as hard as possible for China to inflict harm on the U.S. economy. And we don't do that. Or Trump began the pivot on that. But I'm much more concerned about China as an economic threat to the U.S. than I am China as a national security threat. I'm not really that concerned about China as a national security threat.
Do you think that the two things go together? You can it's very difficult, if not impossible, to split the economic and the military part of the Chinese question, because China.
There's an extent to which China does a lot of espionage to steal American technological and military secrets. Yeah. Okay, we should be a lot better at protecting ourselves against that. But also, one of the things we don't do is we don't say to them, "Hey, you're doing this, and so I don't care if the two issues are not linked, but here's an economic thing that you care about. I'm going to cut off access to that." We won't do that, because the business elite in this country will say, "Oh, no, how dare you get in the way of our commercial relationship?" And then they'll put it in high-minded terms and say, the only real way to make the Chinese behave better is to integrate them further into the global economy, which means we've got to keep doing business. And so it would be self-defeating if we responded to, military espionage with tighter economic measures. I think that's the wrong way to go, honestly.
But this China invasion, it was planned, in my opinion. Do you think they are smart or they are opportunist?
They can't be dumb, because if you look at how far China has come in how short a time, the leadership of that country must know something about what it's doing. I mean, this was the world's largest country by population. I think it still is. Maybe India's passed it, I don't know, but certainly, like, let's say in 1980, it certainly was. And if you look at what the Chinese economy and society looked like then versus what it looks like now, I mean, it took Europe, a couple of centuries to get from that point to the point, that China did it in 40 years. So they must know something about what they're doing.
Yeah.
It can't be completely.
But that's dangerous, right? That's even more dangerous.
Maybe. I mean, it depends on what do they really want? What do they really want?
That is the problem.
Yeah. Do they want preeminence in East Asia? No question about that. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Do they want global preeminence? That's harder to say.
Yeah.
It's definitely not obvious. Even if you want to argue yes, it's definitely not obvious. So what's the threat to the United States from East Asian preeminence of China? There are some. I don't think it's a disaster necessarily for us. Does it erode our position? Sure, it erodes our position. But we also have to ask ourselves, how does the United States that's in the shape that it's in now, how does it stop China from asserting preeminence over East Asia? We're a third their size population-wise. They're catching up technologically. Maybe they never will. Maybe they will. I don't know. But it's fundamentally, they're in Asia and we're not. We're there only as a forward presence, which means, are we going to fight a war? And a war over what? Over the Taiwan Strait, over control of the South China Sea? Could we win that war? Is it worth the cost? All of these are questions that have to be asked. And I can tell you the US business class doesn't want a war with China. So powerful, even if we thought that the United States interests somehow demanded conflict with China, there would be powerful, very powerful political interests in the United States that would say, don't do this, I don't want this, and would work to try to stop it.
But I think I have a slight disagreement. I think the world politics always need a leadership. And the leadership can only forget the international institution, the multilateralism. Well, there's always a country who leads the world and who inspires the world. Yeah. And I think you either have an Americanism or you have Chinese model. And because even if you have a decouplement, only an economic approach, China will respond. In order to get the economic leverage over the United States, they will use the military, military or the hybrid war, as if it is the case, if they think that that's the best way to pressure economically the United States. So in this case of hybrid wars, you need to always counterbalance the equation. The
response to that would be, U.S. leadership isn't what it used to be because the nature of the American regime has changed. American leadership now means leadership on behalf of a kind of globalist, urban managerial elite. Yeah. It's essentially like, we're going to take the blue model and we're going to transfer that to the world, and we're going to ignore the red parts of the rest of the world. Yeah, but the division in the United States is almost mirrored by the division in France that gave birth to the Yellow Vest protests. There's I know a little more about France than I know about much of Europe. There's, essentially you're in Lyon or Paris or Lyon or some of the really cool parts of France, the Deauville, Trouville, the south of France, and so on, Burgundy, the wine countries. And then the rest of it is kind of like red France, right? It's blue collar France, it's rural, it's not included in the great, in Macron's France is, the California parts of France, the California Manhattan, right? And the Yellow Vest is the Ohio, West Virginia parts of France, for lack of a better term, U.S. leadership really only appeals to the former and not to the latter. Now, if the United States were able to sort of reconstitute itself or its politics and say, we're going to be standing up for, nationalist populism around the world, for policies that rebalance economic disparities and things like that, then I would say U.S. leadership would be a net positive. But right now, U.S. leadership just favors for lack of a better term, the blue parts of other countries, favors further globalist kind of integration, further accrual of all of the rewards and benefits to the global ruling class at the expense of these forgotten places. And so if I were a European in the red part of France or Britain or Spain or wherever, I would probably resent U.S. leadership and say, "Butt out!" Like, if you aren't going to kind of take my side in this fight and see that I have really just complaints that need to be addressed, then you're part of the problem.
Yeah. For the last question, and talking about Macron, after you resigned in 2018 to the White House, you came back to the White House as a cooker, as a chef.
Yeah.
Because you are a chef as a profession, right?
I went to school. I went to a culinary school, and it was something I wanted to do, and I got to do on another occasion in February, and then the next big event was the April 24th, but I ended up resigning before that, but they let me come back to fulfill the, so that was a lot of fun.
Experience, because you cook for Macron and all the White House. How was that?
Yeah.
How you can combine both worlds? Because
I mean, look, to be clear, there were a lot of people in that kitchen. I was basically the lowest ranking person there, and I did a lot of, anybody who's ever worked in a restaurant or any kind of commercial kitchen knows a great deal of what you do is just repetitive grunt work.
But you like to cook. I imagine that.
Yeah, just destemming parsley and cutting herbs and that kind of thing. So, but it all has to be done. I mean, you're feeding 140 people, so that's 140. So that's a lot of work.
A little bit stressful.
Yeah, I think we had 15 people on the line. So, and a lot of stuff could be done in advance. So not super stressful. I mean, the most stressful thing is like getting the plates ready to go out. You kind of have a leisurely day that accelerates things. So once the guests come in, everything has to be done on time. Every plate has to look perfect, and they've all go out at the same time. That's when you really get pressed.
And what do you prefer, cook or political analysis?
Well, that's a good one. I guess my revealed preference, given that I never did quit politics or teaching or writing to become a full-time cook, is that I must prefer the former. But I don't know. I've thought about it. Should I quit? A lot of people do that though. And the thing too is really, to be a professional cook, you can't start when you're 50 or 40. You got to start when you're like 20, when you're much younger and have a lot more, because the days are very long and they're very hard, and the pay is lousy, and you really have to just work your way up. I like watching a lot of these documentaries or or reading books about some of these people who go through the process of working their way up the ladder until finally getting like a Michelin star. And it can take 20 years of just absolute grind work to get there.
Yeah.
And most of those 20 years, you're not making a lot of money or getting a lot of recognition. You're poor and obscure. And at the end of it, you may not even get, you may not end up becoming, great, so I mean, I was going to name a name like, Ferran Adria, right? But he's a superstar, right? How many people?
Like Gordon Ramsay?
Somebody. Well, he made the successful transition to a TV star, which Adria really didn't, right? He closed his restaurant and decided to open a kind of cooking school, experimental place. And he's not much in the media anymore. But I mean, just to get to that level, I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but how many 3 stars are there in the whole country of France? It's like under 30. I think and it may be a lot less than that. So it's like becoming an actor or something. How many thousands of people show up in Hollywood every year, and it's the pyramid just sort of winnows as you go up that actually make it. And I think cooking is a lot like that.
Yes.
Okay. So Michael, are we again on flight 93?
Unfortunately we are. I think precisely because of the great advantages that the blue coalition has over the red. So, there was no chance that like Trump was going to win in 2016, run the table and inaugurate decades of Republican rule. But the Democrats are close to that, right? And that's what that whole book I told you about, the emerging Democratic majority, is all about. Now, it's taken longer to realize than they thought, and there may be a hiccup. We'll see. We'll see what happens. You know, we have a midterm election coming in 2022. Given that Joe Biden, you know, whatever one thinks of the irregularities of the 2020 election, and I myself have my doubts, I don't doubt that Joe Biden got more popular votes than Donald Trump, and by several million. And yet, Nancy Pelosi lost House seats. So it wasn't a great, you know, usually when a president comes in, they have what's called coattails in the American tradition, right? President wins big, then everybody down ticket in his party wins big. That didn't happen in 2020. So it set some people up for saying, well, maybe the Republicans will do great in the House election in 2022. Maybe they'll even retake the House, and so on and so forth. I don't know, but the problem for us is that we have a hard time, my side, the Republican side, the populist side, whatever, has a hard time using power, because even when it wins power, there's so much power in other institutions in America that are controlled by their opponents, the universities, the media, the corporations, and things like that. So a lot of the time, the most that the Republicans are able to accomplish is stopping and slowing stuff down. Whereas when the Democrats are in power, they can advance an agenda much more easily than we can. So I wish we weren't in a kind of a constant flight 93 situation. But I think, unfortunately, for my side of the aisle, we are.
Michael, some new book is coming, or something that you can tell us?
No, I don't. I mean, I've been writing a lot, not a lot, because I've actually had a very busy academic year so far, and it's still busy, and I haven't really caught up. So I've written some essays. You can find them at the Claremont Review of Books, at AmericanGreatness.com, or at the American Mind. I think it's actually not I think it's just AmericanMind.com. Actually, I can check the link right now. Yeah, AmericanMind.org. You can find my stuff there. I did begin writing a book. It's a parody of Plato's Republic. But if Socrates were, instead of a philosopher, were like a diversity consultant, versed in critical race theory. And I wrote book 1, or 10 books to Plato's Republic. I have an outline for books 2 through 10. I have not found the time to work on it since. I'd love to get back to it because it was fun to do, and I think it could amuse some people. If I even do finish that, it wouldn't be particularly long. I think book 1 was only like 4,000 words. So if I could get the whole thing done in 40 or 50,000 words, it'd be a fairly short little book. But it might be fun for people to read. I don't know. No.
Why not a balance, like a perspective on the Trump administration, to articulate, for example, the strategy behind Trumpism, to get
I feel like I've done
some flesh to Trumpism, because I mean, there's no ideological book about Trumpism.
I mean, I feel like I've done that. I've done that in essays a number of times, and I did that in The Stakes, which came out, as I said, in September.
Yes, The Stakes, yeah.
And the final chapter is a kind of attempt at laying out a policy agenda for Trumpism. I don't know that I have more to say about that.
Yeah.
But for example, these kind of thoughts about China and foreign policy, and that could be interesting to compile on a book.
As a writer, I've got to be inspired, or it just doesn't get done. It's one of the reasons why I've had jobs as a speechwriter where I write for others, and I find it hard to do because it's just like, unless it's kind of coming from within, it's just hard for me to get words on the page. So I'm not that inspired by those other things. I am really inspired by the woke republic. So as soon as I get time, if I ever get time again, I will probably get back to the woke republic. Yeah.
Okay. I think I don't know, you are the last word, but for me it was
no. For me it's okay.
It was an honor to hear all your opinions. Thank you very much, Michael, to be here and share all your analysis with us. Really, we appreciate it.
Thank you.